Welcome to an extension of the Coach Up podcast. I am super excited to be here with you, with Lisa Boate, because today we are talking, ladies, this episode is all for you. We are talking specifically about the challenges, the fears, the concerns, the unknowns that come with perimenopause and menopause, facing it, all the things about what are we afraid of and what we don't have to be afraid of. And so there's nothing to be scared of it. And so, Lisa, I'm very excited to have you here with me today. Please tell people who you are and what it is that you do.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me today. There's nothing I love more than having these conversations. So it's a great way to hit midweek. So I am Lisa Boate. I am a certified menopause coach and consultant. So I work in a variety of different ways. I do work one-on-one with women. I have a group coaching program, and I also work with organizations to create menopause empowered workplaces. And that's sort of a three-tiered process that starts with professional learning, goes into policy development and implementation, and then ongoing coaching and consulting.
I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone working with organizations to create an environment where women are supported during this time of their life. Tell me a little bit more about that real quick.
Yeah, it's fairly new work here in North America. England is actually a little bit ahead of us on this, and the majority of their organizations have menopause policy in place. So that's the model that I have looked to. And here, as I'm sure most people know or have started to see, the edges of menopause and perimenopause is really starting to creep into the mainstream. This conversation is becoming bigger. And I say this a lot, but I feel like it is the work of women of our generation to really shine a light on perimenopause and menopause and really understand what's going on. There are incredible women physicians who are leading the medical research on this and how we can actually improve our quality of life. And so as that is happening, we're realizing that menopause has significant impacts in the workplace. So I'm Canadian. The Menopause Foundation of Canada released a report just about this time last year about the impacts of menopause in the workplace. And one of the most staggering statistics was that 1 in 10 women are leaving the workforce due to unsupported menopause and perimenopause symptoms. And it's costing the Canadian economy $3.5 billion a year.
Wow.
Yes. And there are very similar statistics in the US. Obviously, your scale is larger, so that dollar number is larger, but it is significant. And when you think about women at this stage, we are incredibly valuable assets to the organizations that we work with. Mm-hmm. We have institutional knowledge that goes back for decades. We have all of the professional learning that we have engaged in over the course of our careers, all the experience that we have had, all the education that we bring. So keeping women, if they want to stay in their positions, if that's what they want, having policy in place that supports that makes a huge difference in creating an organizational culture that values wisdom, that values that experience, and just creates more space. And it can be anything from as simple as having ice packs available in the freezer. Because when you have a hot flush, an ice pack on the back of the neck is medicine. Like it really hits quickly. Or just having a quiet place. If you happen to have a hot flush at work and suddenly you're drenched, having, change clothes, quiet place that you can go, get yourself back together, regulate your nervous system a little bit, take some time with that ice pack, and then get back into work. Mm-hmm. So those are things that are super easy and can be implemented by any organization yesterday, and can go all the way up to and including menopause leave and what that might look like in an organization.
I imagine that people are not talking about this. This conversation is not coming up. And that's why there's not further progress in the US and maybe Canada as like you're seeing, or in the UK and that type of thing. And I imagine that's because women may be nervous, unsure, uncertain about bringing this conversation up in the workplace. And so what are those what's some of those fears that you see your clients have with approaching this conversation with their employer?
That's a really important question. So thank you for asking it. And it's very true. Not everyone feels super comfortable talking about menstruation and cycles and menopause, right? That can be a really intimidating conversation. And there's all kinds of fear wrapped up in this stage. One, that I'm going to be seen as less valuable. I will be seen as being less effective. I will be seen as like, oh, well, that's just Lisa. She's going into her menopause situation again. And we're taken less seriously. And that there's lots of really valid reasons for why we feel that way. I mean, we've seen it play out over and over and over again. And so working with people like me, right? Advocates, that's a really great way to overcome the fear. So I have had people reach out to me and say, hey, will you come and talk to my organization? And once I do that and I get in a room with decision makers as well as people who really need this information, it's always amazing to me to watch the light come back on in people's eyes who have been experiencing perimenopause and menopause symptoms and didn't even know that that's what they were experiencing. Like, so many women have said to me, Lisa, I thought I was in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And or I thought I was going down a really terrible mental health spiral that I would never be able to get out of. Or, frozen shoulder is another really common symptom that comes up during perimenopause and menopause. And that's when you can't, like, you literally cannot raise your arm above your shoulder. Like, it goes this high. And it can be painful and it really impacts mobility. And so if you're in a job where you have to, like, if you're in nursing and you have to lift people and help move people, if you're an educator, education is the field I've been working in the most because I was an educator for 20 years. So that's my wheelhouse. But in education, there's a lot of movement. You're on the go all the time. That kind of lack of mobility can have a significant impact on how you show up in the workplace every day. And when you don't even know that those are perimenopause and menopause symptoms, and there absolutely is treatment, the fear is very real and can get in the way of how you continue to move forward. Another symptom that women really talk about a lot is brain fog and word recall. And those are the symptoms that make people think that they're going into the early stages of dementia, because they're like, I can't make the word work. I can't make the word come to my brain for that thing. Or it takes me so much longer to form my ideas and get them into sentences. And so if you're someone who is presenting in front of people on a regular basis, that becomes a significant issue in the workplace. And so all of those things work to build that fear. But when we have knowledge about what is actually happening, and then we have a plan for how to make it better, we can very easily move through that fear.
I think the education piece is so important because you mentioned that women don't even recognize what's happening, right? Like, I think I'm going into the early stages of dementia, not realizing that you're going through menopause or perimenopause. Yes. And so there's got to be education on the front end for women to even recognize those symptoms. As you mentioned, brain fog and word recall. I know that I went through perimenopause. And now that you say that, I think there was a time I thought, is my vocabulary diminishing? Like, I'm a voracious reader.
Yes.
I used to have an amazing vocabulary, and for a time, it seemed as though my vocabulary was getting smaller. So it's so great to hear an expert share that information. But if I didn't have this conversation with you, Lisa, then I would never have known that. And so one of the things that you talk about is in order to alleviate those fears, is to have an advocate. Makes complete sense. But if women don't know what they're going through, they can't ask for an advocate, right? So that's why it's important for the work that you're doing to be able to reach out to companies to say, have the information, have the space for your women, for this
Yeah.
program. And so what else when we talk about women not knowing even what they're going through and how to address those fears, how do you talk through your clients with once they realize what's going on? There's still the fear of, is this going to go away? How do I get through this? How do you work through some of those with your
Mhm.
clients?
Yeah, again, it's a great question. And when I go in and do professional learning sessions, the work I do is called Finding the Magic in Menopause, because it's important. Menopause and perimenopause, postmenopause get painted with a really dark and negative brush. And there is no part of me that wants to minimize the very challenging impacts of fluctuating and declining estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. They create real changes in our lives. And it also is a time where we get to focus on ourselves. And so it can also be a time of great freedom and liberation, right? All of the roles that we have defined ourselves by for decades, often, intensely, yes, I'm a mother, I will always be a mother, but that intenseness around motherhood is different. Like, both of my children are away at school. So I'm getting back to getting to know myself again as who I was before I was so intensely in that mother role, and then who I am now. Like, how have I changed and evolved? So, all of the time that we have spent pouring into other people, we now get to pour some of that love and care into ourselves. And so, the other thing that is really important is positioning symptoms as messages from your body. These symptoms are not the end. Like, this is not the destination. This is your body telling you that things are changing and we need to do things differently. So, for example, sort of the two hallmarks that people talk about all the time, hot flushes and night sweats, those are actually vasomotor events. It's your cardiovascular system saying, hey, we don't have the same level of estrogen, which has had a protective effect for this system for your life up until now. So it's time to start doing things differently. If you are having joint and muscle pain, same thing. That's your muscular skeletal system knocking on your door saying, hey, things don't have the same level of protection. We need to start doing things differently. And we absolutely can change the trajectory of our health if we listen to those symptoms and say, okay, so for my cardiovascular health, I'm going to start walking every day. I'm likely going to drink less alcohol, because it's another thing. You can start looking at like what triggers those things. So I know if I have a couple of glasses of wine, I will not sleep well, and I will have night sweats, because alcohol has a significant impact on all of those symptoms when there's less of that protective effect from estrogen and progesterone in particular.
Okay.
So I'm going to start drinking a little bit less. I am, really thinking about the amount of protein that we're getting. And then the place I always start with for lifestyle changes with clients is weight-bearing exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. It's out there everywhere. And the research is really conclusive that weight-bearing exercise is the number one way to avoid fragility, fracture, and falls as you get older.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's
Well, I was going to say, for people who don't want to hear that, that's strength training and lifting weights. Lisa
yes.
says it in a very nice way, and you can use your body as
Yes.
weight bearing. Yes, but
the
that can
heavier,
include. Yes.
and the heavier you lift, the better it is, right? Because you really want to have muscle in the bank. Because as we get to this stage, we start to lose muscle significantly every year. And so the more muscle you have in the bank, the more muscle you continue to develop, the less frailty you will have in your later years. So it's really, if you thinking about it as an investment in yourself, right? How do you want to be? If you start thinking about your 80s and 90s, like, how do I want to be able to function in my 80s and 90s? Now is the time to start investing in your health and well-being.
Yeah. And it makes you more confident, right? When you recognize
Yes.
that, okay, this is the symptom. I love that you said the symptom is not the destination. I've
Hmm.
recognized this is going on and I now have a solution. When we have that, that's one way we move through the fear of things. We know what the outcome can be because we know what to do to get to the outcome. There may still be, oh, is it ever going to work? Oh, it takes a while. Oh,
Yes.
I still have a night sweat. Okay, it's not immediate, but the the long-term effect of I know that research backs me. I know that my coach has told me. I know through experience that if I do these things, things will get better, and you will start to experience that better. It
Hmm.
helps us to take those actions much more quickly as we move forward,
Yeah,
right? I'm sure you
absolutely.
see that with your clients on a regular.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is like the hardest part is starting. And I always say, like, that's the most, like, it's the most simple and most complex part of the process because we tell ourselves so many stories and then we expect results immediately. And with weight training in particular, it absolutely takes time. Like, it was probably 6 months before I really started to notice changes in muscle definition when I first started lifting weights. But I can tell you, you and I have talked about the fact that I just moved,
Mhm.
and I love that you talked about confidence also, because during that move, I could lift heavy things. I had stamina all day long. When my husband threw his back out, I was still able to keep going and moving and doing everything that needed to be done. And the sense of, yeah, confidence and empowerment that comes from knowing, like, I am strong enough to do all of the things that I need to do in my life, that becomes when you start seeing those things, that becomes the motivation, because you
Mm.
realize, right, how important that is.
Yeah. You mentioned feeling less effective for women when they're going through this in the workplace. And that makes me think about that with what you just said, because so often if we're feeling less than we did before, and we don't know, either we don't know why or we recognize why. So I'm going through this menopause, but I don't have a solution to help me move through it. Then our confidence does get eroded and we feel like we are less effective or we come off as less effective. We may not be, but internally we feel that way. And so I think it's so important. What you were saying made me think about acknowledgement is so important when it comes to facing our fears and our concerns, right? First saying, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. I am facing the fact that it is happening. I'm not going to put my head in the sand. I'm not going to wish this away. I'm not going to hope
Mhm.
something's going to change. I'm acknowledging I'm facing the fact that okay, I am in a new stage, and I love the term find the magic in menopause. Right?
Mhm.
It's a reframing, and so but first, in order to reframe anything, you actually have to be looking at the picture and recognize I'm looking at it. I see what's happening, so I acknowledge this is what's occurring. And the faster that we do that, Lisa, the faster we're able to then decide to move forward. The faster we can take action. As long as we decide to stumble around in the dark, I'm never going to actually look for a door to get out.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a really good point. And there's so many important things in what you just said, and it really made me think also about the importance of community. Right?
Mhm.
So much in our culture tells us that we have to do everything alone, and that stumbling around in the dark trying to figure out, like, I can't tell you the number of people I've heard say, like, well, it's just my girlfriends and I trying to figure out what to do. And I'm like, but there are people in the world who are skilled, who really know what's happening, who can give you that information, and who can help give you a plan to move forward. So don't feel like you have to do this alone. We were never meant to do life alone.
Mhm.
And women in particular, I mean, humans of all description need community. Full stop.
Yeah.
And women need these communities, especially when our healthcare and health needs have been ignored and oppressed for so long, right? The
Yeah.
female body was not even included in medical studies until 1993.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
There's no way, Lisa. I mean, we had OBGYNs before then.
Yeah. But all research was done on men. Because, yeah, I'll give you a minute. I'll talk.
I know, right? Like, let that settle. What?
Yeah, because because our hormones fluctuate so much, if you are looking for a sample that is going to have consistent results, you don't want women in that group because hormones are fluctuating and will not give you consistent results. And so women were never included in medical studies until 1993.
Please say this is like our countries who are still evolving, such as our second and third world countries. That's who you're referring to. Please tell me.
No, I am referring to North America.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's when you start going down this rabbit hole, there are so many things that start coming to the forefront, like even things like airbags and crash tests were only women's bodies were not represented in those things until well into the 90s as well. This is a whole other conversation, but when we're talking about the research, it was in June of this year of 2024 that the first ever study was released around the impact of declining estrogen on the female brain. Dr. Lisa Boate was the lead researcher on that, and she had to develop the tracer that would be able to trace estrogen through the brain because that technology did not even exist. So she had to develop that before she could even do the study. Yeah. So the knowledge and understanding of how women's bodies actually work is fractional, right? We are only at the beginning of this. And then as the other part that weaves into this, especially when we're talking about fear and overcoming that fear, is the fear of menopause hormone therapy.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So there was, prior to the early 2000s, menopause hormone therapy was a regular part of treatment for women. And then the Women's Health Institute released a study that said that menopause hormone therapy caused breast cancer, that there was a direct link. There were many, many flaws with that study. And the results of that was a couple of things. One being that more women died from fractured hips than ever died from an increase in breast cancer research. And now we have an entire generation of women who we see in nursing homes who are frail, who have fractures, and who have falls. There's known as the 3 Fs. And so, yeah, the research coming out now is very clear and comprehensive that there is not an increased risk. Also, the menopause hormone therapy that we use now, so the estrogen and progesterone, it's a different chemical composition than was at that point, and it is much closer to the actual composition of naturally occurring estrogen and progesterone. So it is one of the gold standards in treatment. And if you are having hot flushes, night sweats, brain fog, it can have a significant positive impact on your experience of and going through perimenopause and menopause. My stance always is this: I am not going to tell you what to do or what is right for you. You need to make that choice, but I will give you really good quality, well-researched, consistent information so that you can make that decision for yourself.
Yeah. And it comes from conversation. So you mentioned we're not meant to do this alone. Community, we're not meant to go through life alone at all. Even when God made the first person, he brought a second one in, women, right? And so we're not meant to be alone. And I think it's important to really talk about one of the ways that we move through the fears that women have around this is community and conversation. And it takes courage to have conversation. It takes courage to be in community. It's so easy to isolate, but isolation is where fear grows, right? it gets dispelled when we are in community, when we're in conversation, because you never know. So, Lisa, if we had never connected, I've learned so much in just these few minutes that if we weren't having a conversation, I would still be in the dark about. Those of you all who are listening, same thing. Due to a conversation between two individuals, you're getting additional information that you may not have heard. And it takes us saying, okay, I'm going through this. I'm going to tell my girlfriend. I'm going to tell my mom. I'm going to tell my aunt, instead of saying something's wrong with me. I feel less effective as a mom. I feel less effective as a wife. I'm just going to push through. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to pray about it, whatever.
Mhm.
Instead of, you can do all of those things, but in addition, share with somebody, because either one of three things is going to happen. They're either going to be able to sympathize with you and you have some support. They're going to ignore you, annoy you, and you're not going to talk to them about it again. That's fine. Or you're going to find some common ground and they may have some misinformation to share that can help. Two out
Yes.
of those three options are great. So we have to have the courage to have those conversations. And then as we have it with one, it may spread to another, the community gets built. And then that fear goes away because now light is being shined on the issue. And we know that fear only exists in the dark. And so I love the fact that you brought that community piece up and having that conversation, because the things that you just shared are coming from a conversation happening that women need to know about.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, for making sure we spread this. I mean, that is the work, right? When I said this is the work of women of our generation, that's
Yeah.
it. It's making sure we're bringing everyone into this conversation. And while you're talking to your sister and your aunts and your mom and whoever in your world, also talk to the young humans in your world
Good.
and let them know, right? Like, I had a conversation with a young man. He was like in his early 20s, I'm going to say. I was at a business networking event and someone introduced us and he said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a menopause coach and consultant." And I could see him immediately like, "Oh, I think there's another health coach over here. Like, let me." And then, but to his credit, he stopped himself and said, "Well, what do you actually do?" And so I
Mm,
started talking about, menopause, perimenopause, and what I do. And I could see his face like starting to change. And he said, "I really wish I had known this when I was a teenager. Because as you're talking, I am thinking back to my relationship with my mom at that time. And I am seeing what you're talking about, she was clearly experiencing. And I, as a teenager going through my own hormonal ride, she and I had this like tricky intersection. And had I known, I think our relationship could have been different."
wow,
Yeah,
that's powerful.
absolutely. So this is a conversation that is not just for the women in our lives, but it also is for the men, for the young men in our lives who need to know what's happening so that we can have those more compassionate interactions with each other, and for our partners or people who love us or whoever to know and understand what's happening so that they don't feel so isolated and so outside of our experience. Bringing one of the things I started doing on Instagram is menopause for men. Like, and this is what you can do to support the person you love who is experiencing perimenopause and
That's
menopause.
good.
Yeah, to bring, going back to that
Mhm.
community, to bring everybody in, because the more we understand each other, the more compassion and empathy we have for each other, especially in our world right now, the better we all are.
Absolutely. This is a conversation that needs to continue. Lisa, there are some conversations that they are for all time. There will, as long as there are women walking the earth, this is going to be a part of most women's journeys. And so it's a conversation that needs to be that happens. And bringing the men into it is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I used to say, when I was in corporate America and was in groups involved with improving women's situations at work and that type of thing, I would tell people, we can meet as women all day long, but until we bring the men in who are actually making the majority of the decisions, we're
Mm-hmm.
only going to get so far. And so to bring everyone in, makes so much sense. And so I want people to be able to continue this conversation with you. I thank you for having this conversation around how do we identify the fears that come along with this, with perimenopause and menopause? How do we move through them? But I want people to be able to continue the conversation with you. So will you tell people how they can find you, connect with you, get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is the best spot because that's where all of my information, that's where my Instagram handle is, Facebook, all of those things. So it is liberatedmenopause.ca. And that's the one-stop shop. And then you can also find me on Instagram at @lboate. And between those places, we can connect easily.
Lisa, thank you for this time. Thank you for your transparency. And thank you for the work that you are doing. It is vitally important.
Well, thank you very much for making these spaces. Oh gosh, as we're talking, there's a dog walker going by that has 12 dogs, which is biting my arm.
It's all good.
Day, right?
Absolutely.
So thank